Wyoming Territory, April 1876. The knock came just after dusk, sharp and low, like someone too scared to hit the door harder. Nathaniel Osborne had just finished brushing down his gelding when the sound reached him. He stood still for a second, hand resting on the barn door, eyes narrowing toward the house. No one visited this far west of Laramie unless they meant to, and most knew better than to show up after dark. He stepped through the barn doors into the wind. The porch light flickered, casting a pale circle around the front steps of the small ranch house. And there she was standing stiff, soaked from the rain, with a baby in her arms and a wooden crate at her feet. She did not speak. Her hair clung to her face in wet strands. The baby, wrapped in a threadbare blue blanket, whimpered against her chest. Nathaniel's boots hit the porch in 4 long strides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low. The woman shook her head, lips trembling. "No," he looked down at the crate. The wood was splintered in places, the top tied shut with rope. Nathaniel's jaw tensed. "You running from something?" She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The baby squirmed in her arms, let out a sharp cry. That was enough. "Come inside," he said. She hesitated, but followed. Inside, the fire in the hearth was still burning low. Nathaniel took the baby from her arms without asking and handed her a folded quilt from the chair. She wrapped it around herself. Her hands were shaking. He glanced down at the baby. A girl, light hair, big eyes. Too small to be more than a couple months old. "Sit," he said, nodding to the rocking chair by the fireplace. "You warm up. I will get something for her." He fetched one of the old bottles from the cupboard, filled it with warm milk, and brought it back. The woman had dropped into the chair like her legs gave out beneath her. Her eyes stayed locked on the flames. She took the bottle with a mumbled, "Thank you." Nathaniel crouched beside her. "What is your name?" She looked at him then. Close up, he saw that her face was smudged with dirt, her cheek bruised, but her eyes green like the pine woods after rain met his without fear. "Olivine," she said. "Olivine Walker," he nodded. "Nathaniel Osborne." She shifted the baby to her shoulder, burped her gently. "Her name is Lark." He looked at the crate still sitting by the door. "What is in there?" Olivine's arms tightened around the child. "Letters, some clothes, the rest of what I have." Nathaniel stood. "You hungry?" She hesitated again, then nodded. He moved to the small kitchen and ladled stew from the pot into 2 bowls. When he brought hers over, she stared down at it like she had not eaten in days. They ate in silence. Lark fell asleep in her arms. After a while, Nathaniel spoke. "You want to tell me what happened?" Olivine's fingers curled tighter around the spoon. She stared down at her bowl. "My husband died last year. We were living near Denver. He left me with nothing but debts. I took work where I could. A man offered to help, said he had land and needed a wife. I was desperate." Nathaniel said nothing, waiting. "He brought me out here, past Cheyenne. It was fine for a while, then it was not." Her voice turned flat. "He was cruel to me, to Lark. I waited until he rode out for cattle. I took what I could carry. I walked for 2 days. Nathaniel exhaled. "How did you find this place?" "I followed the river. Came past a trapper. He said you were alone out here, that you were kind." Nathaniel's jaw worked. He looked at the fire, then at her. "You can stay," he said. "You and the girl. You are safe here." Olivine's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. She only nodded. That night he gave her the bed and took the floor by the fire. She tried to argue, but he shook his head. "You have been through enough," he said. "Sleep." He stayed awake longer than he meant to, listening to the wind outside, to Lark's soft breathing. Come dawn, he rose early, started a fire, and began warming water. When Olivine stepped into the kitchen barefoot, hair tied back, Lark propped on her hip, something shifted in his chest. "You slept?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I have in months." He handed her a cup of coffee. "You can stay as long as you want." Olivine looked at him, really looked. "Why are you doing this for me?" Nathaniel shrugged. "Because someone should have helped sooner." She blinked, and something in her face softened. She reached down and set her hand over his for a moment. His hand stilled beneath hers. That afternoon, he hitched the wagon and rode into town for supplies. When he came back, Olivine had cleaned the whole house. She had washed Lark's clothes and hung them on the line. She had cooked dinner, simple beans and bread, but warm and filling. When he walked in, she smiled at him. A real smile this time. It hit him like a punch to the ribs. "You did not have to do all this," he said. "I wanted to," she replied, setting Lark down in the cradle. "You gave me shelter. I can pull my weight." They ate together again, and after the baby was asleep, they sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. The sky burned orange, the wind carrying the scent of prairie grass. "You always live out here alone?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "After my brother died, I took over the land, never had much reason to leave." Olivine folded her hands in her lap. "Do you ever get lonely?" He looked at her. Her profile was soft in the fading light. "Sometimes," he said. "Not tonight." She turned to him then, eyes searching his, and for a long moment neither one of them looked away. Inside, Lark stirred softly in her sleep. Olivine whispered, "Thank you for answering the door." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Thank you for knocking." The wind carried a chill, but neither of them moved. Not yet. The porch light flickered once more, and the stars began to shine overhead. Nathaniel let the morning pass without comment as Olivine moved through the small kitchen with quiet purpose. She didn't ask what belonged to whom or wait for permission. She simply made use of the space, shelling dried peas into a tin bowl while Lark dozed in a sling tied across her chest. When she glanced his way, he pretended to busy himself with mending the cinch strap on his saddle, though truth be told, the leather had been fine for weeks. By mid-afternoon, the wind had shifted out of the north and the air turned brittle as old bone. He stepped out to split wood before the next cold came down off the hills. The rhythmic sound of the axe rang out steady until Olivine's voice interrupted it. "You always do your work in silence." Nathaniel paused mid-swing. "Noise don't make it go faster." She came to stand a few feet off, arms crossed tight over her chest. "I used to talk to myself when I worked. Had to, with no one else around. You had no neighbors, 3 miles to the nearest, an old widow with more chickens than teeth. Didn't care much for company." He leaned on the axe handle. "And you," she shifted her weight. "I used to think I did, but I never really had it, not the kind that stays." Nathaniel nodded once, then returned to splitting. Later, he found her on the back stoop, repairing the hem of one of Lark's gowns. She worked slowly, as if the needle in her hand steadied something in her. He sat beside her on the step, boots dusty, palms calloused, and offered her a slice of dried apple from his shirt pocket. He didn't expect her to take it, but she did. "I saw a black bear once," she said, chewing. "Just past the ridge behind our last place. I was out gathering kindling, and there he was, halfway down the hill. He looked at me like I was the one trespassing." "What did you do?" Dropped the bundle and backed away. "I think he pitied me." Nathaniel gave a soft huff. "They don't bother unless they're hungry." She looked at him sideways. "Is that true for men too?" He didn't answer right away. The sky was turning the color of pewter and a hawk circled far above the field. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but not always." That evening he brought out a cedar box from the back room, unsure why until he was already holding it. Olivine sat near the hearth, Lark asleep in the crook of her knee. "I kept this from my mother," he said, setting the box on the table. "She used to stitch patterns into cloth just to keep her fingers busy, I thought. Maybe you'd like the thread." She opened the box carefully, as if it might crumble. Inside were skeins of faded red and gold, a pair of bone needles, and a square of muslin half embroidered with cornflowers. Her eyes didn't fill or glisten. Instead, she reached out and touched the thread like it was something alive. "Thank you," she said, voice even and full. Nathaniel rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't seem right to leave it gathering dust. She ran her fingers along the muslin edge. "You keep much from your folks," he shook his head. "They died young. My brother raised me. He was only 14 when it happened." "What was his name?" Levy, she looked up. "You miss him." Nathaniel's jaw worked quietly for a moment. Every day, a long silence passed between them. Not heavy, not hollow, just full. When the fire burned low, Olivine tucked Lark into the cradle and stood by the window, arms folded. Nathaniel watched her from the table. "You thinking of heading on?" he asked. She turned, startled. "No," he stood, walked to where she stood. "You could. Come spring, you'd make it to Fort Laramie easy enough, but you don't have to, I know." Their eyes met and neither looked away. "I didn't come here to keep running," she said. He stepped closer, just enough. "Then you don't have to." They stood that way, the distance between them small and quiet. Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, something had settled. Olivine reached out and touched his hand just once before turning back toward the cradle. Lark stirred softly, then went still again. Nathaniel didn't speak. He only watched her move through the dark with steadiness, the same way she had walked up his porch and changed the air inside the house without asking for anything at all. The ground began to thaw in May. The creek behind the house ran faster, full of meltwater and broken reeds, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Nathaniel had started planting early beans and potatoes in the south field, and Olivine had taken to rising with the birds, moving through the house with a quiet sense of ownership that neither of them questioned. She'd hemmed new curtains from the muslin he'd given her, pale blue ones that fluttered in the breeze when the windows stayed open through midday. She never asked before fixing or rearranging, but Nathaniel never minded. Watching her move through the house, her hand resting briefly on the cradle, her eyes scanning the horizon before drawing water from the pump, felt like watching something long missing slide into place. One morning, while Nathaniel was driving fence posts along the north line, Olivine came out carrying a pail and a folded wool blanket. Lark was asleep against her back, tied close with a strip of linen. "I need more mint," she said, shading her eyes. "Grows wild near the creek, doesn't it?" He set down the post driver. "You planning on going alone?" She tilted her head just enough to make her meaning clear. "I won't drown." He wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against the shovel. "I didn't say you would. Just the path's muddy and sloped. If you fall with her on your back, then you'll find us both stuck in the shallows," she said, already turning. Nathaniel watched her go until her boots disappeared into the grass. He returned to his work, but his ears stayed tuned to the wind for any sound that didn't belong. She came back an hour later with the pail half full and her skirt hem soaked. Lark was wide awake and chewing on her own fist. "I found yarrow too," she said, unbothered. "Near that split cedar." He nodded once, then glanced at the soaked hem. "You fall in." "I slid, didn't fall," she said. "And I've had worse." That night she steeped the mint and yarrow into a tincture, the smell filling the kitchen. Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's it for?" "Lark's gums," she said. "And your headaches," he blinked. "I don't you rub your right temple after working the field, and your jaw tightens when you read in the evening." He didn't answer right away. She dipped a rag into the warm mixture, wrung it out, and pressed it to Lark's cheek. The baby settled almost instantly. "You always notice that much?" he asked. "When it matters," she said. "You don't talk about pain, but that doesn't mean it isn't there." Nathaniel didn't move from the doorway. "You ever want to leave this place?" "Why, just wondering," he said. "You've been here near 2 months, maybe you want something different." She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "I want Lark to sleep through the night. I want her to grow up somewhere where no one yells at her mother. I want to know if I can plant wild onion near the porch." He looked at her, the lamplight catching the curve of her cheek. "You can," she met his eyes. "Then no, I don't want to leave." The wind shifted outside and the fire popped softly in the stove. Nathaniel stepped forward slow until they stood only a breath apart. Lark slept between them, her breath steady against Olivine's chest. "Sometimes I forget what quiet feels like," he said. "But not when you're near." Olivine didn't look away. "You never asked what I want from you." "I figured you'd say if you did." She reached up, not to touch his face, but to undo the sling and lift Lark into the cradle. Her movements were sure, unhurried. When she turned back, her eyes stayed steady on his. "I want something true," she said. "Not loud, not desperate, just something that lasts." Nathaniel's voice was low. "I don't know much about fine things, but I can build what holds." She stepped into his space and he met her there, no sudden motion, no heat. Just the slow, certain meeting of two people who had lived through enough to know what mattered. When her hand found his, their fingers threaded without effort, and when he kissed her, it was quiet as breath but firm like earth. Neither of them spoke after. They didn't need to. Outside, the last snow melted into the grass. Inside, the house held steady. And in the cradle, Lark slept on, untroubled. By early June. The hills had softened into green, and the scent of new grass drifted through the windows at first light. Nathaniel had begun riding into the eastern pasture before breakfast, checking the far fence line where elk sometimes pressed through. Olivine, now rising with more ease than caution, packed him bread and boiled eggs each morning, tying the parcel in a square of calico and placing it beside his saddle without a word. That morning, as he mounted up, she stood beside the porch rail, Lark swaddled in her arms and blinking against the sun. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice low but measured, "there's a horse down the road. Roan mare. Saddle's worn thin. She's been circling the creek bend since dusk yesterday." He adjusted his reins. "You think she's lost?" "I think she's waiting for someone who didn't come back." He studied her face, the way her gaze fixed on the horizon with more knowing than doubt. "I'll look into it." When he returned near sundown, the mare was tethered behind him, ribs showing and eyes wary. Nathaniel dismounted slowly, patted her withers. "No brand," he said. "No sign of a trail leading off." Olivine stepped closer, Lark now asleep in the sling across her front. "She didn't bolt when you rode up." "No, just stood there." "She's seen something," Olivine said. "Or lost someone she meant to follow." Nathaniel nodded once. "You think I should keep her? You think she'd leave if you let her?" They stood quiet a moment, the mare shifting softly behind them. Later that week, Olivine brought out a small wooden box with a narrow clasp. She placed it on the table without ceremony. "These belong to my mother," she said. "I've been carrying them since Kansas." Nathaniel opened the lid to find a pair of pressed flowers, browned but intact, and a folded letter tied with twine. He didn't touch either. "She was a schoolteacher," Olivine said, "strict but gentle. She believed in knowing the names of things, plants, constellations, people who came before. She'd teach you. When I let her." He closed the box gently. "You miss her." "Every spring." They didn't speak of it again, but that evening Nathaniel brought in a book from the barn loft, one his brother had once used to track stars and seasons. He left it on the table without comment. When Olivine found it, she ran her hand over the cracked leather spine and said only, "I'll take care of it." The days stretched longer. Lark began to sit up on her own. One afternoon, as Nathaniel repaired the gate post, he heard Olivine's voice behind him, not raised, not urgent, but clear. "I've been thinking about the well." He turned. "What about it?" "It's too shallow for another summer like last year. If the rains hold off, you'll be hauling water in by August." He leaned on the gate rail. "You have an idea." "There's stone near the creek bed. If we dig down where it slopes, lay it in proper, we could catch runoff. Not for drinking but enough for the animals, the garden." Nathaniel studied her. "You've done this before." "Watched it done, helped some." He nodded. "We can start tomorrow." They did. For 3 days they worked side by side, Nathaniel breaking ground, Olivine hauling stones in the old wheelbarrow, Lark shaded beneath a canvas tied between fence posts. They spoke little, but their rhythm held. By the 4th evening the catchment was laid, packed with gravel and sealed with clay. Standing over it, Nathaniel wiped the dirt from his hands. "Didn't think you'd be good with a pick." Olivine smiled without turning. "You think I got through those years on charm?" He chuckled low. "No. You got through on grit." That night, as twilight pulled the color from the hills, she stood at the threshold of the kitchen, bare feet on the cool floorboards, arms folded loosely. "I never planned to stay," she said. Nathaniel looked up from the stove. "But you didn't go." "No." "And I don't want to." He stepped toward her, slow and certain. "Then don't." Her voice dropped. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She reached for his hand, fingers calloused to match his own, and he pulled her gently into his arms. There was no rush in the way they held each other, just the deep, quiet knowing of people who'd already endured what the world could take. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a slow breath. Inside, the house no longer felt like a place for only one. The wedding was small. No preacher, no hymns, no guests save for a pair of prairie dogs watching from the fence line. Nathaniel carved 2 rings from a strip of maple and polished them until they shone smooth as bone. Olivine plaited her hair with a strip of wild rye and wore the same faded dress she'd arrived in. Lark, now crawling steady and wild-eyed, clutched a button Nathaniel had dropped and refused to let it go. They stood beneath the cottonwood near the back pasture, where the light filtered soft through the leaves. Nathaniel cleared his throat once, but didn't fumble. He took her hand and said, "I've built fences and dug graves. I've seen 100 seasons pass without changing a thing. But you," he stopped, eyes steady on hers, "you changed everything?" Olivine didn't cry. She never had, not once in front of him. But her voice shook when she answered, "You gave me the first place that ever felt safe. That's all I ever wanted, and more than I ever thought I'd get." When he slipped the ring on her finger, her hand didn't tremble. They walked back to the house slow, Lark balanced on Nathaniel's hip, cooing at the breeze. Olivine reached for the gate and paused. "I'd like to build a root cellar," she said. He blinked. "Today?" "No," she said, smiling, "but soon. I want to keep potatoes through winter." "Maybe dry apples if the tree gives enough." Nathaniel nodded. "We'll need to dig deep, past the frost." "We will," she said. That night, after Lark had fallen asleep wrapped in the quilt Olivine had sewn from the scraps of her old gown, Nathaniel and Olivine sat outside on the step. The sky stretched wide and dark above them, the stars clear and sharp. Nathaniel kept his hand on her knee, thumb brushing across the fabric. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "To Denver?" He nodded. She shook her head. "There's no one left there for me." "Nothing worth remembering." He didn't press. Instead, he pointed toward the barn. "I've been thinking of fencing off the north slope. Let the mare foal there if she's carrying." Olivine leaned her head against his shoulder. "You think she is? I'd bet on it." "Belly's rounder and she's been off her feed." She smiled against his shirt. "Then we'll need another trough, and hey, come fall, we'll manage." They sat in stillness for a while, then Olivine said, "I never thought peace could feel like this. Like work and small things done right." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head. "It's all I've ever wanted." In the weeks that followed, they built the cellar, dug it slow between chores, laying stone by hand. Olivine kept the ledgers, marking how many sacks of oats remained, how many strips of venison dried true. Nathaniel mended the south fence and started teaching Lark to balance on his knee without tipping. By August, the garden yielded beets and squash. Olivine strung herbs from the rafters, and Lark took her first steps from the cradle to Nathaniel's waiting arms. One evening, as the sun dipped low and lit the fields gold, Olivine brought out 2 mugs of cider and handed him one. "I want to teach her letters soon," she said. "She's young but sharp." He took a sip. "You still remember how?" "I'd like to try," she said, "and I think she'd like it." He watched her for a moment, then said, "When you first came here, you didn't look anyone in the eye. I didn't trust anyone to see me. You let me." She nodded. "You made it easy." He reached for her hand, the ring still smooth and pale on her finger. "You think you're happy? I know I am." That winter came early and hard, but the house stayed warm. The cellar held. The mare foaled a healthy colt, and Nathaniel let Lark name him Clover. They cut firewood in shifts and took turns reading aloud from the books Levy had left behind. Olivine taught Lark her letters by candlelight, tracing them in flour on the table. Spring arrived clear and bright. The fields greened again, and the creek ran full but calm. On a morning in April, nearly a year to the day since she'd first knocked on his door, Olivine stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, Lark tugging at her skirts. Nathaniel looked up from the porch rail. "What?" he asked. She stepped down to where he stood, pressed a hand to his chest. "I'm carrying again." He held still for a beat, then grinned so wide it pulled a laugh from her. He reached for her waist and kissed her slow, the kind of kiss that said everything already had a place. That summer they added on to the house. Just 1 room, but enough. Nathaniel built the crib by hand. Olivine planted marigolds beside the porch. They never left the homestead. Never needed to. Years passed. Lark grew tall, then taller. The boy came in the fall quiet, strong-lunged, with eyes like his father's. They named him Eli. Olivine kept teaching, not just her own but the neighbor children too, when the families farther east caught word of her and asked. Nathaniel bred horses, made good money selling stock down near Rawlins. Their days stayed busy. Full of work that mattered. Full of hands held and doors left open and nights spent beside the fire while wind drifted across the plains. They grew old together and steady. And when people asked how they came to be, Nathaniel only ever said, "She knocked." I answered, and Olivine, always near, would add, "And we built something from there."